Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sporting Fan Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about the NRL race to the finals. Now, currently there are 10 teams in contention for finals in the NRL. The current top four are the Warriors, Panthers, and Roosters, all locked in on 38 points, and the Dolphins is currently sitting on 36. Now, the only thing that separates the top three teams is for and against at the moment, with the Warriors sitting on a for and against of plus 295. The Panthers sit 1 point below that with a point differential of 294, and the Roosters are on a point differential of 162. The Dolphins are currently sitting on 36 points with a point differential of 138. Now, who do I think is in the best position out of all three? I personally think the Warriors are currently sitting in the box seat just simply because their last two home games are both in New Zealand, and they've got Newcastle and Manly in the last two games. Now, while I think the Panthers can also finish with a minor premiership, I just think they're looking a little bit vulnerable at the moment, and the Roosters also they have. There's only been a handful of games where I think the Roosters, I would say, have been playing really well. This season. Obviously the last game against the Panthers. Sorry, 2 rounds ago against the Panthers, they played really well. And there's been a handful of other games as well. The advantage that the Roosters and uh, Penrith will have is that they, if they finish second and third, or first and third, depending on how it works, they will be in Sydney until bare minimum when they play the Warriors. Depending on how the draw works, and potentially they could stay in Sydney for the whole final series, potentially. Um, but if you look at the Panthers running, they're playing the Bulldogs. However, the Bulldogs have um a lot of players out. Apparently, they've been hit pretty hardly by COVID, and then um there's also then they've got the West Tigers coming into the last round. Um, and then the Roosters, they have the Dolphins, and then they've got the Rabbitohs. So, um, then the Dolphins, obviously, like I said, they have the Roosters this weekend. And then in the final round, the Dolphins have the Gold Coast Titans. So the Dolphins are away the next 2 weeks, but they are in Queensland for their last game. So it's going to be an interesting finals because interesting how the top four finishes because the Roosters and Warriors have beaten Penrith the last few weeks. Um, so the Warriors beat Penrith in New Zealand, and then the Roosters beat Penrith. This will be a big psychological blow if the Roosters can beat the Dolphins this weekend, so that they can go into the final saying, "Hey, look," and especially if they beat South Sydney, who I'll speak about a little bit later on. Um, but I think it'll be a real psychological blow for the Roosters if they can say to the rest of the league, saying, "Look, we've beaten two of the other three top four teams." Because obviously they're the top four team. We've been two of the three top four teams, leading into two out of 3 weeks in the last month before finals. And it can be a real psychological blow for them. And if they can win this game, on Saturday, just simply because I just think the Roosters have been in a spot where it's really hard for them. Um, it's really hard to gauge where they're at because they have the game against Penrith, which I think is their best performance. They've also beaten the Cowboys 82-12, which is the most amount of points scored since like 1935 in the NRL, which was then the NSWRL. Um, and then there's only two games that I think scored more. The Roosters, who were then known as the Eastern Suburbs, obviously they've had a name change since then. The Roosters back then with the 3-point tries beat the Bulldogs 87-7, and what was the pre-merger Dragons, the St George Dragons, um, also had a hiding against the Bulldogs as well that season. I believe they scored 90 points that game. So the Roosters can go in. They have those kind of performances, but the problem the Roosters have is they have these performances like they did on this latest weekend, where they lost to the West Tigers, where that performance was really that. No, taking nothing away from the West Tigers, they turned up to play, and the Roosters were just worse. But the Roosters were terrible. Like the West, if that was against someone like Penrith, if that was someone like the Warriors, they really would have had a score put up against them. They would have probably had 40 or 50, potentially even more points scored against them in that game. Um, so that's where I'm a little bit concerned with the Roosters. Penrith losses to the Warriors, um, losses to the Warriors and Roosters leading into finals. So in the month before finals. So um, you know that's where I'm a little bit concerned with them. The advantage of Penrith have got is that they've got these big game players that really know how to win. Or you don't win four premierships in a row. Uh, make five of the last six grand finals. Make the last six prelim finals. Unless you've got a really good, and that's with losing a lot of players over the years, and you know, important players. They lost Jerome Luai, they lost James Fisher Harris, they've lost all these kind of blokes, and they're still near the top. Um, and they've also lost Stephen Crichton a few years ago. They lost Matt Burton. You can name a whole list of players that they've lost, and yet they keep just coming out and producing these top quality players where next player up. The Warriors, where it could become a little bit unstuck for them, is that they are have lost a lot of they have lost a lot of halfbacks this season. So when losing all those halfbacks, and I know they're still winning, and a lot of people saying, "Well, it's next man up." They've always done it, but it's when these big games happen. This next level up. So everyone will say I know they keep saying up. So that is my only concern with them is that they have lost a lot of play in key position, a lot of players in key positions. The fourth team in the top four there is the Dolphins. I think they're going to struggle to win the premiership this year. Obviously, no team has ever won the premiership after conceding 50 points in a game. They lost 66-0 against Cronulla. Now, they had a lot of players out in that game. Well, actually, did they? They were just woeful. I remember there was something in that game where they didn't that it was around Origin time where they just didn't bounce back. However, they also lost to the Seagulls early in the year. This was the first game that was considered under the Fosball for Manly, where they lost 52-18. So this is where I think they can struggle a little bit in finals. I think it's really down to the top three. I think it's the Roosters, Warriors, Penrith. I'd love to see a repeat of the O2 Grand Final of the Roosters and Warriors because I think that could be a really top quality Grand Final. Um, Obviously, the Roosters are my favourite team, so a lot of people say that's biased. Um, and but I genuinely think it's going to be a combination of two of those three teams are going to be in the grand final. I think they're the only three that can win the grand final. So even if by some chance two of those three teams get knocked out prior to the grand final and during the finals, I think they're going to be the only three that win it. I just can't see. I think it was only a little bit of a hiccup that game against the Tigers. Um, the advantage at each tier of those teams, they all have big time quality players. And while the Warriors have never won a comp, they've got players that have been there and done it before. Guys like Kurt Capewell, James Fisher Harris, and these blokes that are these old heads that really drive the standards. And really do well. So, and they're not going to be leaving New Zealand for at least a month. If they win the first week of the finals, um, that means that they can go right through the prelim final without leaving New Zealand. That keeping in mind that they win their last two games. With their superior for and against, if they win the last two games, the Roosters are unlikely to catch them. The only way that can happen is if they have two 1 point wins and then the Roosters do something miraculous in the last two rounds, because the Warriors have a plus for and against of 295. The Roosters have a plus points differential of plus 162. So, the Warriors have a better for and against of 133 points. So that will mean the Roosters will basically need to win the last two. Basically need two more Cowboys games where and that is unlikely to even be enough. They would need to win 82-0, not 82-12, what they did. And to have any chance to get over the Panthers and Warriors. Because like I said at the start, Panthers have a 294 as plus 294 as well. So Warriors 133 points ahead, point better for and against. And the Panthers have a 132 better for and against. Yeah, and so I think the Dolphins, this will be their first final series, but I just think this will be good experience for them to, if they can make the second week, well, a bare minimum, if they, provided they finish top four, they don't have a hiccup, and the Sharks don't go above them, who I'll get to in a minute. Um, they will finish fourth, and they will probably finish at least second week of the finals. I think even if they finish fifth, they will make the second week of the finals. It will just be if they can go any further than that, they can make it prelim. But I think this will be a really great experience for them. But I just can't see them making that top four. Now, the next four, the 5, 6, 7, and 8. So currently in fifth place is the Cronulla Sharks. Now, they are an interesting team because they have been in the top four for the majority of the year. However, they've had a couple of losses the last few weeks where they have now slipped to fifth place. They're currently sitting on 34 points, 1 win behind the Dolphins. So, but they've got a far superior for and against than the Dolphins. They're plus 173 in comparison to the Dolphins plus 138. So if the Dolphins win, if the Sharks win their last two games, who are against the Parramatta Eels this weekend, then they have the Melbourne Storm in their final game at home. There's a potential that if the Roosters win this weekend, the Sharks can slip into fourth place. However, I just don't see the Sharks have really slipped off the last couple of weeks. So they've had a few good wins. So ever since really they had the massive win against the Dolphins, they've had only one real out or one out and out dominant performance. So since then they have beaten the Knights 20-18. They beat Manly 48-12. That is strong showing against the Rabbitohs where they won 32-16. However, I believe in that game the um they it was the second half where they really blew out, so it was tight. It was 18-6 at halftime, so it was comfortable, but I wouldn't say it was dominant by them. And then they've had losses to St George, and then they've had a loss to Canberra, and they really struggled against the Gold Coast Titans. So while they did beat the Titans, they were actually down considerably. They were down 16-8 at half time. So it was not an easy victory. Nico Hines' kicking was off a bit, 3 from 6. And, the Titans could have really caused an upset in that game. So this is where I think Cronulla, they've really dipped. Do I think and I just don't think that they will win this season, just simply because they're, I think they're best. They're a team where they can do well. They're a consistent team, but they're not a dominant team. I don't see them really causing too many issues for the top three teams. They played against the Roosters early in the year, um, and the Roosters won that game pretty comfortably. Um, and I just think, and they've had other games as well. They have beaten the Warriors, but again, that was a long time early in the season. And I just, yeah, they lost the Roosters twice this year, so I just can't see them really being that strong when it comes to finals. I think they might beat some the teams like maybe the Knights, Rabbitohs, Cowboys, Bulldogs, and Seagulls, who are the other teams for the in contention. I just can't see them being top three. Newcastle, they're a resilient team. I just think they've had too many injuries. So the Knights, 32 points, point differential of plus 56. They will be there in the finals. Um, I think that they will be a team that can really. I think a full strength Newcastle team can cause problems. Like Dylan Brown, Kalen Ponga. As much as I think Kalen Ponga is overrated, but I think that they can really cause issues for those top teams. I just think with Dylan Brown out, and they've had a few other bad injuries, I just think it will be a step too far. I think they will be competitive. They have shown this year that they're not a team that they will. They're not a team that will just roll over. They're not a team where, if they get 10 points or 12 points behind, they think they're not going to be throwing the towel and they get 12 points behind with 15 to go. The opposition is going to score 3 or 4 tries, and the score ends up not really representative of the game. Like it might be, it won't be a 22-12 with 15 to go and end up, you know, 40 or 50-12. They're not a team that will do that. Can't see that being the Knights, but I think with those top teams, I think they just don't have the firepower to throw a shot. I think they can. They will push the top teams. I think those top teams. If they're off, the Knights will beat them. But if these top teams are on, they will struggle. Um, but like I said, they won't roll over. I think it will be like a 22-12, 26-12 kind of result against those top four teams in the finals. I think they'll keep them honest, and I think they're a really good side to play in the finals because they won't they will push you, which will give you good experience for those other teams because they will push you. And then you can try a couple of things, and you won't just so you get built up. I can see them potentially being the bottom four sides. I think that will potentially make the eight. That will be there. I think they will be the ones that are most likely to cause an upset. Just because they are such a resilient team. They're a little bit like the Warriors, and not as good as the Warriors, but they are like them in a sense where they just will not quit. They are such a good, resilient team. So, and then in seventh place we have the Rabbitohs. Rabbitohs, a lot like the Knights. A lot of injuries, top players. However, that's I think where the comparisons kind of end. I don't think the Rabbitohs are as resilient as the Knights. I think there's too many personalities in that club. I think when things get a little bit tough for them, they do roll over. Um, I think there are other. I think some of their leadership group are not the right blokes. Like for example, Cody Walker. I think Cody Walker gives away too many dumb penalties. And when things go against him, things when he sees like there's players that once they see that red mist, it just overtakes them. He's one of those players, and there's been plenty of times over the years where the second he does a play and it doesn't go for him, starts giving away a lot of penalties. And that's where I think, and there's other players as well in that team who are not necessarily as penalty happy as Cody Walker, but I think he could. There are other players that in that team where I think that once things start getting hard, they start throwing in the towel. The Rabbitohs are currently sitting on 30 points with a points differential of plus 63. I think probably they're going to be safe. They got the Titans this weekend. If they beat the Titans, they'll be in. Their big advantages they're for and against. Their biggest problem is that they got the Roosters the last week. So if they lose to the Titans this weekend, and the Bulldogs and Seagulls win, who I'll get to in a minute, that's where they'll be in peril because if the Roosters turn up in that last game, um, they're going to be in trouble because the Seagulls, they've got the Dragons this weekend. They've got a good for and against. They win. Seagulls are primed to really potentially overtake them. Um, so yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the Rabbitohs. This is a real crucial game for the Rabbitohs in their season this weekend. They win, they're in finals, in my opinion. Just because they've got such a good for and against in comparison to the Cowboys and Bulldogs below them. So one win out of the last two, they will be there. However, I don't think they're going to be. They're not making a run. They're likely if the ladder stays as is, or if they stay in the position that they are. I can't see them beating the Knights. if they drop down one position, I can't see them potentially beating the Sharks. I think the Sharks will win. Like I just mentioned that the Sharks beat them, fairly comfortably earlier in the year, a few weeks ago. Um, I think it'll be something similar. I just can't see the Rabbitohs really. If they win the first week, the other thing I think that's as far as I'll go. I don't can't see them making it past the second week. I think they will struggle the first week as well. So that leads me in to eighth, ninth, 10th. Cowboys are equal points with the Rabbitohs. They're on 30 points. So I think, well, with them, one win, they're in. I think it will be a step too far for the Bulldogs. So the Cowboys run in. They have in the final two rounds. They have the West Tigers and they have the Raiders. So I think if they can beat the West Tigers, they will be playing finals. Comparatively, the Bulldogs are on 28 points, minus 32. The Cowboys. So this is where it gets interesting because the Bulldogs are on 28 points. They have a negative 32. So the Bulldogs actually have a superior for and against with a minus 32. But the big problem that the Bulldogs have is that they got the Penrith Panthers this weekend, and that's why I say the one win for the Cowboys will get them in. I can't see the Bulldogs beating the Penrith Panthers, and I can see the Cowboys beating the West Tigers. So as much as the Bulldogs have a superior for and against, the they've got the Cowboys just need one win, and I think that will knock out. Well, if the Cowboys win this weekend, Manly season's over. That's the end of them. And no matter what, even if the Seagulls win their final two games, they finish on 30 points, and that will be the end of their season, unless, like I said, the Rabbitohs lose their last two games. Um, so that's where it is crucial for the Rabbitohs and Cowboys. One win will get them through. There's the Bulldogs is pretty simple. They need to win the last two games. However, it's going to. I know they beat the Panthers earlier in the year, um, and they beat them comprehensively. They won 32-16. No one saw that coming, especially in the way that the manner that they did. Because the Panthers were winning comfortably up until that point. They hadn't lost a game. And everyone thought, Panthers. There was talk after the first five rounds, are they going to go undefeated? And then that game happened. And obviously, since then, the Panthers have had a few other losses. But yeah, it will be interesting to see the last couple of rounds. But I just think um I just can't see the Bulldogs replicating that, I should say, just because, like I said earlier, they've got a lot of plays out with when I was talking about Penrith. They have a lot of the Bulldogs have a lot of players out with COVID. I do see them beating the Broncos, but I think this week will be the biggest game for them. Whereas Manly, I think they have too many things that need to go right for them. They obviously need the Bulldogs not to win both their last two games, um, which you know there's a potential that they'll win one, and if they win both the Seagulls, they have a plus 66 for and against. So if they win both their last two games, then the Bulldogs only win one, they will actually finish above the Bulldogs. They could finish in but the biggest problem that they have is that they got the Warriors in New Zealand in the last game. Um, the Warriors have they're basically the hardest road trip this year. Um, you know, they're very hard to beat at home. Um, and the Warriors have the equal best home record this year out of any club. So both them and the Panthers are 8-2 this year at home. So and so that's where I think Manly have got a real uphill battle in that the last 2 weeks. I think they just don't have enough wins on the board. I think if they had an extra win, I think if they had won a couple of extra games, I think potentially they could sneak into that eighth place. But like for example, they had a 1 point loss against the Cowboys and they had a loss against the Eels if they potentially won, and they had a 1 point loss against the Bulldogs earlier in the year. I think if they won one or potentially two of those games, like if they won both those 1 point games, that they lost, I think that they would be playing finals. They didn't, they're out. I just think like I said, I think that there's too many things that need to go right for them to be playing finals. Which is unfortunately for Manly. Um, but it could be an interesting thing to see how it goes. You never know how it will finish. It'll be it's a crucial time. I think it will be a fun race. I think it'll be exciting, and I can't wait to watch it. I'm interested to hear all of your opinions, and yeah, fingers crossed. It'll be great final few weeks in the race to the finals, race to the top four, race to the minor premiership. It's always going to be interesting. So I'm here keen to hear your thoughts, and until then, have a good one.